Hi, if someone says they have sensory processing issues, they may look completely different to somebody else who has sensory issues. And that can be really confusing unless you understand that there are different types of sensory issues. And I'm going to cover the 3 different types in this video today and the subtypes, because if you have a sensory processing difficulty, it is going to look different according to how your own nervous system is responding to the sensations around you and from your own body. So to split it first into 3 areas, you have those who have a modulation issue, you have those who have a perception discrimination issue, and those who have a sensory-based motor disorder. Do not be worried about the names whatsoever, but they are helpful if we're speaking the same language. So, if you have a modulation issue, you are then going to be split into perhaps another 3 or 4 different types of personality, different types of behaviours, different types of characteristics. But a modulation difficulty is where you are not responding to the senses in the way that other people do, and you may respond overly or under respond. So we'll all know those who have their hands over their ears because there's too much sound or it's too frustrating. They will be the avoiders. So we have avoiders and seekers, and those who are just not really registering sensation at all. So those who have a modulation issue who are seeking sensory input, they basically don't have enough information to the brain. They're just not getting enough information to the brain for the brain to make sense of it. So they're the ones that they are climbing, they are jumping, they may be making noises all the time, they may be the fidgety ones. These are the sensory seekers, and that's a type of modulation because the brain isn't getting enough sensory input for it to be calm and relaxed and organised. So that's one aspect of modulation. The other aspect of modulation is the avoiders. Those are the ones who avoid sensation because it's just too much or too uncomfortable. So the avoiders are the ones who don't like the sounds, who avoid smells and perfumes. They avoid the fabric of certain clothes. They may find it very difficult changing from summer clothing to winter clothing. They will avoid social situations because it's too complicated and too complex to manage, or it's completely overpowering and overwhelming because of the sensations, the noise, the smells, the touch, the movement. They'll want a much calmer life. So within modulation, you have those who are seeking lots of input, and that's why your child or you might look as though you're a real active go-getter. Then you've got those who tend to be more avoiders and want more of a quieter life. And then you have those who are classed as low registration, poor registration, bystanders. There's lots of different words that we can use to describe those behaviours, but basically they do not get, they're just not registering all the information that is coming from the environment. So they're much more laid back. They don't necessarily engage much. Things have to be a lot bolder, as I put in my course. Things have to be a lot bolder for them to actually register the information, but they're quite passive. They're not normally a problem. They just don't engage and are not as active in everyday life as, you know, you've got the seekers here and the avoiders. They're both very, very active, and then you have quite passive behaviours that can follow from modulation. There's a few other things as well, but that's essentially, if you're dealing with a modulation issue, that's what behaviours can look like. Then you have a perception and discrimination aspect of sensory processing. Now, people can have the whole range of differences within sensory processing issues, or you can just have a very, very tight behaviour, way of behaving that fits one particular type of sensory processing issue, and that's really easy because we just deal with that. But most of us are human, most of us are quite complex. Hello, lovely to see you. Most of us are quite complex, so it's quite hard. We need different strategies to come in because we're dealing with a bit of modulation, we're dealing with a bit of clumsiness, and dealing with lots of different things. So if you have a perception, a discrimination issue, then it's much harder for you perhaps to feel things, to be able to engage with your environment in the same way. You may not see things in the environment, pick those things up, may not hear things in the environment so much. And then we move on to those with a sensory-based motor disorder. They're the ones who will present as being really, really clumsy, dropping things, bumping into things. They don't have good awareness of their own body. So over here you've got modulation, and it's much more a behavioural approach and much a behavioural response to how things are. Lots of tantrums, quite a lot of stubbornness, a lot more behavioural looking things. And over the other side with sensory processing issues, you have the motor side of things. Those that can't sequence to organise their bodies to catch a ball or to kick a ball. So we can have all aspects of sensory processing, or we can just have one of the three main areas of modulation, discrimination, and a sensory-based disorder or difficulty. And just to say, there is nothing in the diagnostic manual to call anything a diagnosis of a sensory processing disorder. It doesn't exist, but it is a real phenomenon. Just because it's just not in the paediatrician's book doesn't mean that it's there, because it is there. It's there in lots of different forms, and we work with it all the time. So that's why we class it sensory processing differences, sensory processing issues, sensory processing difficulties. But to actually call it SPD and have a diagnosis, that doesn't actually fit within the medical model. So that's certainly why I describe everything that I do as sensory processing difficulties, because we don't have that yet in the diagnostic manuals. But it is there in for those who have autism, for those who have ADHD. It's part and parcel of their presentation. But many of us don't have those other issues. We just have sensory issues, and we need to learn how to work with them the best we can. So I hope that's clarified a little about why we may look different, even though we're part of the classification of having a sensory processing difficulty. So if you'd like to find out more, www.sensoryprocessing.co.uk is where there are free downloads, courses, coaching that I can come alongside you. But I hope that's cleared it up a little bit for you. There's always much, much more information into each of those three areas, and I'll keep feeding you that information if it's helpful. Okay, thanks. See you soon. Bye.